Okay, Leo, good morning. We're live. Thanks for joining me on my podcast this morning. I'll go ahead and give you the floor just so you can introduce yourself to the audience and kind of establish some credibility background about who you are and what you do.
Good. Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, Connor. And so my name is Leo Bottary. I run a company called Peernovation LLC out of Carlsbad, California. And basically what I do is I work with CEO peer groups and peer groups for business leaders around the world. And I also take what those peer advisory groups do so brilliantly for one another and take that into teams to make them higher performing in organizations. And it could be any size organization, and it could be any industry sector, because we all have teams and we're all working together. We're all working really hard to try to get some really great things done. So the work really that I do for teams kind of walks through the door of what peer advisory groups, as I mentioned, have done so well for so long. And it really takes why they're so effective and brings that, and I think, spark into a team in any company.
Yeah, I appreciate that context. So maybe for me, and I think the rest of the audience, can you give a more exact definition of what a peer advisory group is? What does that look like in terms of who it is composed of and what the cadence is for providing feedback, or who are they advising and on
Sure.
what?
Yeah. So whether the peer advisory group happens to be for CEOs or CFOs or director level employees, whatever it happens to be, right? Whatever kind of common professional role they share. Oftentimes, these groups will come together, and in many respects, they could be from various industry sectors. Some certainly there are groups that are in specific industry sectors, right? Rex Roundtables run something for the health and fitness industry, for example. But if you look at like Vistage or EO or Ref Global, they run groups largely for, not exclusively, but largely for people who come from different industry sectors to come together. The point is that they have many common challenges, right? They know exactly what it's like, for example, in a CEO group to sit in that chair and be the CEO and have all the responsibility that comes with that, all the stakeholders, the fact that they can't look at things only from a sales, marketing, finance, legal lens. They have to look at all of it. And because they share that common responsibility, they can come together and, again, share common challenges, but also learn from one another in terms of, for example, there could be a process or a way of doing things that is commonplace in one industry sector that's unheard of somewhere else. But all of a sudden that CEO thinks to themselves, wow, that could really work for us. In fact, it could even be a competitive differentiator. So when you put groups together like this, it provides an active learning opportunity for them to not only, again, learn from one another, but I think give one another that confidence, courage, and encouragement to try what they've learned and bring it actually forward into their organizations. And so these groups that some are run by, again, countless organizations out there around the world. In fact, I think in the last 5 years, the number of organizations running groups has just exploded. It's definitely become a go-to for people realizing that in this fast-paced world with everything from AI to all of the changes that we're dealing with and what's coming down the pike with the economy and everything else, that maybe going it alone isn't the smartest idea. Maybe if I were able to pick my head up from my desk at my office and get out there, once in a while and really spend time with other people, again, that share these common challenges, that would be beneficial. Oftentimes, these meetings could be anything from, depending on the organization, they may run monthly meetings for a full day. They may run monthly meetings for a half day. Some meet several times a year for like 2.5 days, and they take a deep dive into each other's business and talk about what they're doing and how they can move their organizations forward. And they not only talk about challenges they're having, but clearly opportunities as well, right? What's changing in the world that may be providing an opportunity to grow someone's business, right? Or if someone is looking to expand, either whether it be with a new online portal or with going into another part of the world with their product, to be able to get guidance from other people that have kind of been there, done that in many respects is hugely helpful.
And so I guess just to clarify, and it makes sense to me now, peer advisory groups means that if it's a CEO peer advisory group, CEOs of different companies are coming together to meet and brainstorm and strategize.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm curious at all because when I was checking out your LinkedIn profile, researching, does this occur at all? Because I thought perhaps that this may be useful as well, where a CEO has a focus group with employees at their company. Is that something you work on as well, or is it really just a peer to a peer, a CEO to a CEO, a CMO to a CMO? Um,
No, I mean, you can arrange these groups and organize these groups in many ways. So, for example, I also lead peer advisory groups inside companies. So, in other words, the way to take what peer advisory groups do so well is either to create groups in your companies, right? Because groups, if you think about it, are designed to help the individual members. Teams are designed to create a shared work product or do something you can only do together. So when you have groups come together, they're actually hardwired to help each other be stronger team members. Or, for example, they're able to take something that they learned as part of a big learning development day or part of micro learning or whatever the curriculum may happen to be at a company and have a mechanism for operationalizing it. Because oftentimes, let's face it, we go to some big learning and development day. We learn all this great stuff. There's this great content. It's all really good and well intended and all that. But the reality is that when we come back from that day, we get sucked back into just trying to catch up on all the things that we are trying to finish that we missed from the day before and what we have ahead and all that. And there's not that time to really sit and say, okay, what is the one or two things, right? What are the one or two things we learned that if we work together to implement that, it could be a game changer for us. And yet all too often there isn't no such mechanism that exists. And groups inside companies can be incredibly powerful. And that's just one way to do groups inside companies. And of course, the other way is to take, again, what the groups do so well in terms of how they engage one another and what that looks like and what the ground rules are and how to create greater clarity among team members. Like, what do I expect of myself? What do I expect of the other people on the team? What do we expect of any new team member that wants to enjoy the privilege of being part of what we do? And how does what we do connect with the overall purpose and goals of the company? When you can give people that kind of clarity with one another and with their connection to the organization, that can be a game changer in itself. And it sounds so simple, and yet all too often it's just non-existent in so many places.
Can we back up a little bit? And you said that you speak to the effectiveness of these peer advisory groups, these CEO peer advisory groups. When did they? Can you maybe give me a little history on when they began, or when the case study for the first effective CEO peer advisory group was it? Is there a specific example as you look back in history?
So the most prominent organizations that are doing these kinds of groups of business leaders today basically started in the late 1950s, okay, and then have emerged now through the 60s, 70s, and that has continued to grow. I did a study of a number of these organizations actually and co-authored a book called The Power of Peers, How the Company You Keep Drives Leadership Growth and Success back in 2016. I was actually an employee of Vistage at the time, who assembles and facilitates peer advisory groups all over the world. It became evident that the way I described it to them was that we're trying to sell a Mercedes to someone who doesn't even know what a car is, right? Because the category was just so anathema to people, right? They just didn't really understand, kind of what it was all about and how they might fit into that. So the idea was not to write some kind of hardcover brochure about the company and how great we are and how we do things, but let's step back. Let's look at the entire category where we not only may learn something, but also really be able to speak to it in a way from a true thought leadership position, which isn't trying to sell anything, but just say, look, you all should know that this is available to you and find the group that's right for you. But when we conducted the study, we were looking at high-performing peer groups, which of course begs the question, what does that mean? What's a high-performing peer group look like? So we actually depended on the organizations to tell us, based on the metrics they used to measure a group's performance and efficacy. So some used something as simple as net promoter score. Some looked at compound annual growth rate for members over a period of years to see how they were helping one another. Some used everything from retention rates to survey data, so all kinds of combinations of things. And when we looked at these high-performing groups that were identified for us, we went to meetings, we visited members, we had in-depth interviews about what they do, both the leaders of the group and the members of the group. And we basically learned that the groups all shared basically three common characteristics. There were three models at work. One of them was called the learning achieving cycle. The idea being that we learn better when we learn together. Social learning theory has been teaching us this for decades, and it's been around for quite some time. The thing about it is, though, a CEO group isn't a book club, right? They're not there just so they can all read the same thing, talk about it, understand it more deeply, and then walk away. What they also do is they have to, they give one another that courage, confidence, and courage to apply things they learned. And once they do, and even if there's some trial and error, when they achieve something from it and actually celebrate that win, it drives that continuous loop, right? It drives that reinforcing loop. Actually, celebrating was only added recently to the learning achieving cycle, and it was largely because while I had always considered it part of the achieving stage of things, the reality is that so few people celebrate. They don't celebrate those small wins in the workplace that can be so important to giving people the fuel to kind of continue on when we are trying to pursue longer term goals. So there was certainly that part of it in terms of the power of the learning achieving cycle. The second is because when you help one another work through challenges or identify opportunities and maybe see opportunities a bit differently, you experience both intentional and collateral learning. So the intentional learning comes from, okay, I'm bringing you content about culture or sales or finance or whatever happens to be, and people intentionally kind of take that in and do something with it or not. The collateral learning, basically, or sometimes called accidental learning, comes from John Dewey, like in the 1930s, is kind of what we learn from how we learn. So it's all these other things that aren't the intended lessons, but as you're engaging in those conversations, you have to be present. You have to learn how to really listen, ask precise questions, not rush to judgment, jump to conclusions, make assumptions about things, right? So you get into a whole discipline and a whole mindset. And the more practiced you are at that, it not only makes you a better group member, but makes you a better leader back at your company. And I can't tell you the number of CEOs who've said to me, when I bring those behaviors to the workplace, my direct reports start modeling those behaviors as well. So everyone kind of becomes the big winner for that. And then last but not least, we have something called the leadership triad, where if you think about what makes leaders effective, particularly, in peer advisory groups, it's that they are servant leaders. They're not there to pad their resume or for their own self-aggrandizement. They're there because they truly care about the aspirations and goals of the members in that room, and they work with them to do that. But it's not like the leaders up here and down here somewhere are all the group members, right? We actually created a triad where we look at the leader, we look at any individual team member, and then the group or team is an entity. And inside the middle is whatever result we happen to be looking for. So the idea is that we all have a shared responsibility for whatever result we're looking for. I don't care if it's how accountable you are, how much fun you have, how productive you are, but kind of everybody owns it. And I think when everybody is there playing for one another, it's not a you on one side of the table, me on the other. We are all in this together, and we're all in to make this happen. I think it's a powerful dynamic for groups. An equally powerful, if not more powerful, dynamic for teams. And one thing I want to mention, just going back to the learning achieving cycle for a moment, the relevance to teams. If you think about, and I'll often use sports analogies just because it's so visible to us, right? We get to see sports, we get to see the results, we watch what happens on the field. If you think about it, think about the best teams that it doesn't matter in terms of the teams that you can think of that they are either winning championships or consistently in the playoffs. They're just good year in and year out. Now, they may use different language around this, but the reality is that none of those teams regard winning the championship as their goal. Not one of them. Their goal, how do we get better every day? Their goal is that learning achieving cycle that I'm talking about. How do we, spend time together and practice and be better today than we were yesterday to set us up to be better tomorrow? Because if we know we're committed to that if we see excellence as a verb and we are constantly just committed to just fine-tuning that attention to detail, that how do we get better, we will get championships become our reward. So they're not the goal so much as they're a reward for the goal of doing what it takes to make these things happen. And to the extent that we can take what groups do so well and get teams to start falling in love with what it takes to be great and the process of that, and spending more time on what it takes to produce great results as opposed to burying our heads in Excel spreadsheets, keeping our fingers crossed, hoping that somehow these results become possible, I think the better.
Mm-hmm. And how do you instill that desire to be great? Because I think, or just my experience in corporate careers, or even at really large corporations, I mean, there are just so many employees, and there are just certain employees that, one, aren't paid that highly. Two, their compensation is entirely fixed, right? They're on a fixed salary of $70,000 a year. For the most part, I think you're going to get a large amount of people that say, hey, I'm just here punching a clock, collecting my paycheck. No matter what I do, I'm not compensated further for the success of the company. So how do you either deal with those employees or avoid more employees kind of falling into that apathetic mindset?
So it's a great question. First of all, there are a lot more currencies out there than what their compensation is. And so I'll just start there for a minute. But the reality also, because obviously compensation is a big part of why we work, it's important to everyone. But this is where, and it's a perfect segue, your question leads to, okay, all of those great things, all those high performing groups and teams and all that. Well, it's true that those high performing groups we mentioned and the high performing teams that I've seen as well all have those three elements going on. But it didn't happen by just putting a bunch of people in a room and hoping for the best and wishing for those things, right? So this is where we talk about the 5 factors. And the 5 factors become an important framework for having intentional conversations about every one of these things that you mentioned. So one is having the right people in the room. Okay, that's factor number 1. Do we have all the right people on this group or on this team to make us as productive as possible? And that only means the number of people and kind of who they are, but what are our expectations, again, of ourselves, of others, and any new person that wants to become part of us? So you create clarity around that. You don't assume that, oh, we're all on the same page when it comes to what our expectations are. No, you're probably not. And unless you have that conversation and you really talk very specifically about what that looks like, then people have clarity. And quite frankly, it's an important part of, and an important challenge, by the way, in any workplace today. Grambley Harris poll did a study last year that said companies in the U.S. alone are losing $1.2 trillion annually due to ineffective communication. And lack of clarity becomes a huge part of it. It's what most employees will ask of their CEOs. If a CEO says, what could I do to help you be more effective in your job? It isn't more money. It's give me greater clarity. Give me greater clarity on my role. Give me greater clarity on how I'm doing. All of these various conversations that they want to have with people. So identifying who are the right people for your company. There's a lot of people we'll interview who are good, but are they right for us? Maybe what's that it factor between what makes you successful in this organization versus anywhere else. So that's number 1, and picking the right people becomes huge. Second was identified basically by Google in 2012. It's psychological safety, right? That feeling of, all right, I feel like I belong on this team. I can ask questions. I can admit mistakes. I can contribute ideas. I can challenge the process or even challenge the leader in service of what we're all here to do together, what we've all agreed that we care about and is important to us. So again, to create an environment where you can have that level of candor, where it's really about the work and it's not ever personal, becomes huge. Third is obviously productivity, a focus on, are we doing everything we can to be as effective and efficient as possible? So are these 19 meetings we're having really crucial? Maybe they are. Maybe they're not. Maybe there's too many people there. Maybe they're about the wrong things. Maybe something that is a book report meeting today could be a co-creation meeting somewhere else. It would actually be not only more productive, but far more interesting, right? So we look at productivity in a number of fronts. Could be meetings, could be hybrid workforce, could be all those things. Fourth is the idea that we have a culture of accountability that isn't about people coming in and feeling like they've got to play defense, that they're trying to impress their boss or hit KPIs. they're accepting personal responsibility for bringing their best for themselves and one another as they've agreed and as they've defined in terms of the right people, right? So we're just accepting responsibility for what we've already agreed, is so important. And then last but not least is the leader being that servant leader, that leader who is there to make the team successful, not to make a name for themselves. A leader who, I think is really there to not only be part of the team versus apart from it, which obviously, which is a really part of it. That's why that triad exists, right? It makes it clear that we're all on the same side here. But the leader does have some primary responsibility on top of that of serving as the steward of the other four factors, making sure we have all those right people exhibiting those right behaviors, because we know how, devastating it can be when you have one toxic employee and what that can do to a team. So, and by the same token, you just want all the individuals in your team doing the kinds of things they need to be doing, that they not only enjoy an environment of psychological safety, but they're actually leveraging it. They're actually participating in it and feeling comfortable enough to do what we talked about in terms of asking questions, admitting mistakes, and contributing ideas. And then, of course, accepting responsibility for being their best. Now, the leader is not going to be the enforcer of member-to-member accountability. That's going to be something they are going to own amongst themselves. But by the same token, they can provide context and resources and ideas that help create that healthy culture of accountability with one another. Now, to get to another part of your question, though, that I think is really important, there's a gentleman. His name is Sir Dave Brailsford. So Dave Brailsford actually was the CEO of something called the Ineos 159 Challenge, which helped former world record holder Eliud Kipchoge be the first person to actually ever run a marathon in under 2 hours. Now, it's not an official world record, but they did all of these things. They brought these team of experts together, and everything from weather to nutrition to shoes to clothing to all of it, right? To wind resistance on the course, all these kinds of things to help Kipchoge break 2 hours, which they did. Now, keep in mind, you have all of these experts from all of these various fields. How do you get them to work together? And there's a couple things that had to happen. One, he said that if you think there's no I on your team, you're crazy, because there's a whole bunch of eyes on your team. So for us, we knew, what's our goal? Well, our goal was pretty clear, under 2 hours. Our purpose, however, was to inspire the human family, so that for anybody who is touched by this whole initiative, that they can think that whatever vocation they happen to be in, that we can all just get a little bit better. We can all kind of maybe shed some of those self-limiting beliefs we have and all. Now, it's fine that that's the goal and the purpose of the Ineos 159 Challenge, but what Dave Brailsford did was he went to every single person who was part of this, whole ensemble putting this together, and he said, why does this matter to you? And he said, the more that I understood that, and the more the people cared that I understood that, recognized how much I cared about understanding that it creates a level of engagement for everybody. Because to your point, somebody might be concerned about compensation. Someone might be actually concerned about just other things. There's other reasons we are doing what we do at whatever point in your life. And the more that the leader understands what that's all about, the easier it is to connect and work with you very much on an individual basis in that regard. So he found that to be incredibly powerful. And what that did also was it sparked another thing that he felt was so important, was a hyper level of communication among one another, right? Why? Because we need clarity. Because if there's an expert in another field and I really don't know anything about what he or she does, I'm not going to know how to collaborate with them. I'm not going to know who to ask for help about what, unless I really understand everybody's role on the team and what they can bring to the table. And it created all these incredible opportunities for people to discover ways to just make things remove another obstacle or two for Kipchoge so that they could, achieve the under 2 hour goal. So it's that kind of stuff that I think, when you think about those 5 factors, when you think about the role in the leader and making sure they understand that. And I'll say too that I'm not sure that one of the most important interview questions you could ever ask a new employee is, why do you want to work here? Why do you want to do this work at this company? What does that look like for you? And I think you can learn a lot from answering that question. I also think there's an aspect of even going to your employees and saying to them, what is the difference between the person who makes it in this company and the person who doesn't? And for me, this is certainly born out of many hiring mistakes over the years. And I think anyone who's been doing in business for long enough has made a whole bunch of them. Great resume, great interview, team interviews them. We love them. And the next thing you know, 3 months later, we're like, why is this not working? Why is this going so poorly? And oftentimes it isn't that the person wasn't good, but the fit wasn't right. And this is us, I think, as leaders need to understand what that's all about. A number of years ago, one of my favorite teams to look at actually is Gino Auriemma and the University of Connecticut women's basketball team, right? One of the top programs in all of college sports, men or women, for the past 20 or 25 years. As that program started to grow and gain in popularity and they start winning national championships, what happens? Now you've got the best high school basketball players from like every state who want to come and play at UConn. Now, they can take 2-3 people a year, maybe something like that. It's not a lot in terms of the number of recruits they can take. It's probably a bit more than that. But point being, you've got way more people interested in the program than not. And how do you make the decision? Who's going to be successful here, given you've got all these really great players? And what they did was when they were scouting these players, watching them during college basketball games, they would not only pay attention to what they did while they were out on the floor, but they paid particular attention to when a player was put on the bench just to get a breather for a couple minutes. And he basically said there's two kinds of kids. There's one kid like throws a towel over her head and just gets herself rested and ready and get back out on the floor. But then there's the second kid, who he said is far more rare than you might imagine, who is on the edge of her seat, yelling out encouragement and instructions to the people still in the game. He said the second kid is committed to being a great teammate. And for us, that's the it factor at UConn. You can have all the skills and all the stuff, but if you're not committed to being a great teammate, you're going to play your college ball elsewhere. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that kid or that they're not going to have a brilliant career. Or people say, oh, they passed on that player and look what she's doing, at some other school. She's probably thriving at some other school because that's where she should be. And the same holds true, I think, for UConn, and I think the record speaks for itself over the years in terms of what they've been able to do. And it's about how do you create an ensemble that, and understand what the it factor is in terms of what works for us. And I think that's a big part of it.
So how important as a leader or CEO is it to paint or have a strategic vision or competitive advantage and be able to articulate that to employees to instill them to want to be the best and understand where you're headed? Is that a big piece of it as well?
Yeah, there's no question. It's about clarity, and it's also about CEOs showing a belief in the people that we can all do this together. Sometimes, we are chasing lofty goals as a team, and you start looking at it and we're like, really? like that's a big ask, or that's a big mountain to climb, or that's whatever it may happen to be. And yet, there's something really powerful in a leader believing in you and teammates believing in each other and what that can produce. And again, using sports, as I kind of mentioned, you can see that over the years. Looking at military, when you hear stories about different battles and different things that have gone on and what some of the odds were and how clarity about what the mission was and the commitment to fight for the person next to you became so, powerful in terms of, the result of that engagement. So, it's all really huge. Excuse me.
So kind of off that same point, I think a lot of this is tying back to the mission and where we're headed and how the mission of the organization, whatever it is to be great, is to help others. I'm just curious what you advise for, say, your CEO of a big tobacco company or Philip Morris, or you run a casino, and those things I feel like intrinsically have large downsides to that. So how do you instill greatness when a company on its surface may not have that as its mission?
So if you're trying to suggest, for example, that there are companies out there that people on the outside don't believe they have the most, honorific, purpose or mission or whatever, I want to say this, that I think you could take, it's interesting because um, I think that, first of all, we make choices about where we want to work. We're not victims in the workplace. I do a lot of work with students at Rutgers University. I've been teaching graduate school between Seton Hall at Rutgers for over the past 15 years now. And it's always interesting to me when a student makes the mental shift of going from, okay, I'm going to get my resume together and keep my fingers crossed that somebody is going to give me a job, to being clear about who they are, what they want to do in their life, and where they want to do it, and pursue that. And so I think when we can get to that place in our lives, it's surprisingly, successful in how many people get to actually do what they want to do, even if it's not a straight line, right? To do that, but with some level of reflection, they understand themselves and what they're looking to do. And again, there's lots of currencies out there in terms of why people are doing what they do and who they're doing it for. So it could be that they are working at a specific place and maybe they don't have, a mission or a vision that is ideal in terms of for them. It does provide for their family in a way that allows them to do other really great things in the world. So I think we have to kind of imagine it from that perspective as well. And this is why I think Brailsford's model, for this is so powerful and makes so much sense.
So I think you made some good points. And I've interviewed other people on this podcast, and it's kind of true to me too. I feel like a lot of people just fall into certain fields or careers because they say, "Oh, that's what my dad did," or "That's what my uncle did," and so I'm just going to be an auto mechanic as well. And you just talked about how it's important to find that clarity and really know what you want to do and why you want to do that. And you talked about how you teach graduate students. So what is the key to finding that personal clarity when it comes to career or aspirations and fulfillment?
So one of the courses that I teach for Rutgers is a personal branding course. And the most fun part of that course, and basically what the course does is says, okay, here's what the big brands do so well. We look at Apple, we look at BMW, we look at Warby Parker, you can look at Aflac, you can look at Starbucks, you can look at a host of whole brands, right? There's so much about what they do that we can apply to our own personal brand. And, every one of those brands knows themselves. They know who they are. And so a big part of this course, and I think the most fun part of the course for the students, is taking that reflection time, that time that we often don't take for ourselves unless we're asked to do it. And it's really to think about, what do I want? I mean, what do I really want? And actually be in a group of people that has enough psychological safety in the case of what we're doing in this course. And I try to very quickly create that environment so they can share with one another. Because sometimes we're not always, wired to say out loud what our real aspiration what our real aspiration is in front of a group of people, because might look at you like, oh, really? You're never going to do that. So there's always that little fear in us that happens. But if you can create the safety that we can all we're here together just to talk about what we want and how we can make these things happen and about what's possible for our lives. And if you can create that and kind of set that loose a bit, now all of a sudden people are free to explore what their true, I think what where their passion lies. And so that's a big part of it, is giving the time, space, and the psychological safety to have that kind of reflection among themselves, to be able to share it with one another. And then when they get used to talking about it, used to thinking that, they have in their minds a understanding at least a path forward to doing what they're doing, then they might actually share those things with other people. I in the second book that I wrote, called What Anyone Can Do, it kind of spoke about formal peer groups in many respects, but it also spoke to the idea that even if you're not part of a formal peer group, we are really bad at asking the people around us for help in doing whatever it is we're looking to do. It's why the failure rate on New Year's resolutions is somewhere around 92%, at least to the last thing, right? Because New Year's Day, we're all excited about it. Yeah, we're going to do this. 3 weeks or so left to our own devices, gone. We're like, I don't feel like doing that anymore. If, however, you took some time to enlist and engage the support of the people around you, right? It could be your family, friends, mentors, mentees, teachers, whoever it happens to be, and say, this is what I'm looking to do over the next 6 months or over the next year. I would love your help with it, and maybe in some very specific way. You would also say, hey, if there's anything you're looking to do, I'm there for you, and let's see if we can actually help each other accomplish goals. In 1976, called the Long Run Solution, he's the former editor of Runner's World, was talking about successful runners and successful people. And he basically said this, most of those folks aren't capable of superhuman feats. They don't leap tall buildings in a single bound. They just do the things that anyone can do, that most of us never will. So the point here was to say, you know what, if you actually enlist and engage the support of others and get them involved, they will help you do those things that anyone can do far more often, and actually help you do, what you have openly expressed you want for yourself. No one's saying to you, hey, Connor, this is your goal. And I'm like, really? Enforcing it upon you. You've already expressed it. You've said you want to do it. They just want to help you make that possible. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think our perceptions of others are much more apprehensive to approach other people. And I'll just say, for me personally, it's kind of happened with this podcast, right? Or when I first started, I think, okay, why would anybody want to sit online with me for an hour and record a conversation when I don't have a background in media? I'm just, like I said, I just work for a company as a director of sales. I have no background. So why would people want to have an interview with me? And then you just start reaching out to people and you find that people are much more approachable and open, right? I mean, you're taking time out of your day to do it, and you just keep doing that and you build confidence over time. So it's just something I've realized in this journey. And I think, like you said, it can be applied to anybody's goals, that our perceptions aren't always reality. So
And I personally, I just love it when people are curious. I know you have different goals for this, but if 5 people listen to this, I've still felt this is worth the hour, right? I mean, the idea is that we can have a rich conversation about a topic and getting your questions and be able to talk about it, not so much from an interview perspective. It's not like you created a list of 40 questions before we started and we're ticking down the list. We're actually able to have a conversation about this that hopefully draws some folks in. And I think, your willingness and ability to do that will over time, draw some listeners for you, and it'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, I think these things are great forums. And if people actually were having more conversations and fewer arguments and debates out there sometimes, that would be a good thing. We could understand each other better, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's why I like this as well, is right. You get an hour to fully articulate all your points, right? This isn't just a 3-sentence tweet where people take that in any direction they want. There's a lot of nuance to what you do and the points you're trying to get across. And this is the way to do it, I think, right? Is an hour conversation, not a tweet. So that's another reason I really like this as well.
Good.
Yeah. So just to kind of pivot back, what would you say CEOs, going back to a CDO, a founder, a leader, what's the low-hanging fruit? What are most CEOs not doing that would have the biggest ROI on a productive team, a successful company that everyone that is a CEO is trying to build, whether or not they're doing it effectively?
So I think that CEOs have to own receipt of the message as intended. And sometimes they all don't do that. I'll give you an example, and this was a unfortunate story for me, but the greatest communication lesson I ever had in my life, right? When I was in junior high school, I was asked to fill in on our 1-mile relay team. So, and I had practiced this and all that. So, I was presumably prepared to do it. I was just running the third leg of it, which typically probably the slowest guy on the relay team's running the third leg, but at least to kind of keep things going, so I could pass the baton on to the anchor leg, fastest kid in the city. And our team was undefeated, by the way, that year. It's the last meet of the season. Race goes. I held my own. Actually, I had a slight lead over the kid that was in third. I went to pass the baton. Baton hits the ground. We lose, it's over, right? This undefeated season gone, the whole thing, right? So the coach came to me afterwards and in no uncertain terms said to me, that was my fault. End of story. There's no, he basically said that you never let go of that baton until you know it's within the person's grasp. And only then can you let them run with it. So now think about this from a communication standpoint, right? Well, I really wish that never happened. Believe me, to this day, I do recognize the genius of it in terms of communication. That when we are communicating with others, we can't assume that everybody's gotten the. You think about audiences out there. We all have different biases, all have different ways of interpreting the same language and all that. It becomes really critical for the leader to own clarity in that regard and to create that among others. And by the way, it's not just the relay race metaphor that is relevant here. There's a painting that hangs in the National Gallery of Art that tells the story of a general who gave an order, and that order was misinterpreted, and it cost countless soldiers their lives. And he was relieved of his command. And it wasn't, the idea that the order was misinterpreted was not regarded as the soldier's fault. It's regarded as the leader's inability to create clarity that made it certain that people knew exactly where they needed to be and what they needed to be doing so that we wouldn't get outflanked, which is what happened there. Same holds true when you see someone, hand a scalpel to a surgeon. It's like, bam, right in the hand, right? It's not like someone's tossing a, scalpel over an open wound in the hope they catch it, because, so we need to own that. And I think that Grammarly-Harris study that I mentioned before about ineffective communication and the implications that has. We think about communication and, everyone wants to talk about finance and marketing. Communication is part of all of it, right? Unless we have clarity, unless we have real communication system that takes place that isn't overwhelming and isn't crazy in terms of people getting buried in 500 emails and wondering why didn't you get that specific message buried in paragraph 8, okay? Things like that. And the impact that has in collaboration, and certainly the impact it has in capacity. Because if everybody's chasing their tail and spending 30% of their time doing work that they don't need to be doing, then all of a sudden it hurts the capacity, creates greater anxiety, and then, just has implications on everyone's mental health in the workplace. So this clarity communication piece for CEOs should be job one, because I think it can do it's everything. And by the way, to instill that culture throughout the organization so everyone accepts responsibility for receipt of the message as intended, and that we are really having true interest in dialogue. And of course, that clarity, again, isn't just one way. Go back to Dave Brailsford, right? He has clarity about why every single person on this team is there and what inspires them and what's important to them and what matters. So the more that we can create that clarity of one another, it's between the leader and the employees and the leader, and the employees among one another, among team members. That's game changing, and it's largely it's what Peernovation in many respects is all about. We help people create intentional conversations that bring that and make all that possible.
You mentioned clear communication or clarity in communication. I'm wondering how that is measured or how that is taught, right? Because I view communication is very much on a spectrum. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. So how do you assess if a CEO is effectively communicating, or how do you say a very ineffective CEO versus the best? I mean, what are the metrics or qualities you look for?
Yeah, so in large part, the only way you can measure the receipt of the message as intended is by making sure that the people receive the message as intended. And they will tell you, and they will at least act on that accordingly. And it becomes, I think, really important. Obviously, the CEO of a large company can't be responsible solely for making sure that every single person in the organization got the message, but they can make it part of the culture. They can make it part of what their direct reports and their direct reports there, and the way that we want people to have clarity and understanding about exactly what we're doing, so that when you have those engagements, and oftentimes it's not only about clear language, but it's reinforcing and overlapping messages that allow for people to say, okay, got this, and teams to come together and report back to their, okay, here's how we're going to approach this based on exactly what we understand the charge to be. So there's a lot of back and forth in this that can be fine-tuned, but and I think once people start recognizing that we don't have to clear up misunderstandings or deal with people's assumptions about why we're doing something or why we're not, or jumping to conclusions or rushing to judgment about things, that we give things a fair shot, right? One of the dynamics that happens inside companies, and one of the things that we do a lot with is that the relationship among the peers is huge. I mean, it's really huge. Edelman Trust Barometer in 2019 asked a question and basically asked the employees, where do you find out what's really going on in your organization? Okay. And of all of the sources of ways you can get information, when people wanted to find out what's really happening, not where they first heard the information, but where they find out what it means, they look to one another. So, in other words, you may come up with this big announcement. They have clarity about what that big announcement was. But now, all of a sudden, you've got employees talking to others saying, what do you think about this? Do we like this? We don't like it. Good for us, bad for us. Last year we had some big announcement. And, 2 months later, no one was talking about it anymore. It just kind of went away. So are we to take this seriously, or do we think this is just one of those flavor of the month kind of things, right? Understanding the horizontal dynamics in your organization, being connected to who key influencers are, huge, right? So there you have senior VPs, directors, all that kind of stuff going on in your organization, right? There are also people who may not have the fanciest title, but they're really influential with other employees. The more we can understand who those people are, and the more we can have dialogue there as well, so that when those kind of sense-making conversations happen among employees, and it's not if they happen, it's when they happen, then at least you can get people you have ambassadors for trying to create clarity for you, which is, I think, one really important, piece of this. Because you look at just all the research around change initiatives, for example, right? Could be change in policy, strategy, whatever it may happen to be. The underperformance and failure rate, when you look at the swath of research out there, can be anywhere from 65 to 92% on the downside. The interesting part about this, though, is McKinsey will tell you that about 2/3 of the time, those failures or underperforming situations don't occur because the strategy was so bad or the policy was so ill-conceived. It's you couldn't get the people behind it to the degree necessary to give it a fair shot. In other words, we couldn't get people rowing in the same direction, even long enough to see if this works and can connect. And so that way, in those circumstances, you get perfectly good initiatives that are doomed to failure because people just didn't believe in it and execute against it. So clarity's hard work, for sure. But I think when we start looking at things like change initiatives and certain successes and all that, we can start measuring our success in doing the things we want to do, recognizing that communication is I think, a linchpin there.
Isn't the issue with change is that the perception of things have always worked the way they are currently? Why do we need to undergo this huge shift, which could temporarily dip productivity or profits or revenue, right, but in the long term, take you to new heights? I mean, is it overcoming just that, whatever it is, 6-month period where that can occur? It's like moving your cheese.
It goes right back to clarity, doesn't it? Right? People have to understand, what is the why behind what we're doing. And particularly, again, when I talked about those key influencers, they have to be able to, I think, answer that question and talk about, what that looks like. There's so much out there with regard to trying to get people and including them in the process as early as you possibly can. Peter Senge, in his book, The Fifth Discipline, referred to a quote someone shared with him when he said, "People don't resist change. They resist being changed." And that's really profound, right? And we've all experienced it in our own life, right? If you're in a relationship with someone and you're the one that wants to end that relationship, you're good with it. If you're in the receiving end of that, and someone's upending your life out of nowhere, you're thinking, "Yeah, we're not going to see each other anymore." It's like, whoa, wait a minute, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so imagine, in the workplace, it's obviously very similar when we get the sudden news, or we get information that we don't quite understand why we have to go through, to your point, maybe some pain for X number of months in order to come out the other side. This is where including people in the process as best you can becomes really important, and also really having clarity about your why and what's going on, and recognizing that this is going to be a change for people, and we get it. It's going to be a change for all of us, but together we're going to make the change, and on the other side of it, we're going to be able to do this and this more clearly. We're going to meet challenges of the future that are come to us that we would never be able to meet had we stuck with our old technology, for example, if you want to use that kind of frame. So again, I think that kind of all goes back to clarity, communication, and inclusiveness, and sometimes companies aren't always great about including people because they think that if I include people up front, that it's just going to slow down the process. It will slow down sometimes, in a lot of cases, when you may start, but you're going to get to the finish line a lot faster and a lot more effectively if people feel that they have some sense of input and ownership and voice in what you're doing. And I think that's an important aspect of this.
So I'm curious from an employee perspective. Just let's say hypothetically, you work for an organization, and you've approached leadership. You're at a specific department or division, and you've asked. You don't really understand the why behind the work you're doing, or how does the work or my department contribute to the strategic direction of the organization, and what you do in that situation if you're not getting any response, or if the CEO or leader of your company can't explain the why, and you keep asking, and then there's no response. I mean, what should a employee do in that situation?
Well, that's a pretty general hypothetical. I think that I'd find it a little difficult to imagine that if an employee has a real curiosity about that question, that he's going to get no response, right? That there's
Mm-hmm.
going to be something, somewhere. You may not like the response, you may not feel satisfied by the response, but hopefully you will get it. And again, I think we should always be, companies are doing it all the time. I think we always need to be thinking about, am I in the right place for me, in my life? And I think for most really good employers, they just don't care about what you're doing for them then and for your company. They should care about you and your career, and how to set you up, in a way that, hey, if it's you serve them and you stay at the company 20 or 30 years, great. But we're going to help you be the best person you can be while you're here, and help lift you to where you want to go, and where your passion is. So, um, you know, I just think that, ask the questions. I think 9 times out of 10 or more, you will get an answer to that question. And then I think you're always thinking about, okay, how does this, because this felt really good to be here 5 years ago, maybe it doesn't feel the same way today. And maybe there's again, the more that we reflect, the more we think about what's changed or what we want, or whatever. And sometimes people ride those, what they sometimes recognize as temporary situations. And they kind of weather that little storm a bit and decide to stay, or it's time for them to make a change. And again, we have the power to do that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think maybe a good example, like earlier in my career, right out of college, I went to work for Oracle in the Bay Area in an inside sales position, and they were really beefing up their sales team to sell their sales cloud, which was essentially a CRM competing with Salesforce. But upon looking at the product, it was clear that Salesforce offered a far superior product. And I guess the question from my perspective became, why are we trying to sell an inferior product up against Salesforce when they have the clear competitive advantage? And you go up to your management, and Oracle's a huge company, and the director above them, and there's really no response. They're just saying, hey, we're just doing it, and you need to figure out how to make it work. So I think that's kind of where I'm coming from with that question. If as the employee you say, hey, I don't have the competitive advantage I need to be successful here, and so what do I do in that situation where you feel like you're being led down the wrong road by leadership?
So, and it's so interesting because, and I don't pretend to know the situation you're talking about, but generally speaking, when that situation occurs, when we think about something like Salesforce or any really robust system, right? The reality is that people use a very small percentage of what its capability really is, right? So you oftentimes have companies paying for things that they will never use because they just will never use all of it. And so if what you were selling may have not had the same capability, but offered the capability that's most used by small to mid-sized companies, for example, at a better price point, then that's potentially a valid, value proposition for those type of companies against a sales force, if you will. And again, I'm obviously speaking very
Yeah.
generally around that, but that's kind of how I might have thought about it. But I don't think you got that answer apparently. So I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's nuanced, right? And then it's on your leader to know and say, okay, well, this is why your perception of Salesforce being unbeatable is wrong, and here's the steps you need to take in order to do that. And if you're not receiving that as an employee, right, you look elsewhere. You're not at the company long, and so
People don't even use probably. I mean, far less than half of what PowerPoint can do, for God's sake. Let alone something like
yeah, it's
Salesforce,
a
or
good
you know
point.
what I mean. So yeah. So
Yeah, just kind of something I thought of that from
sure.
my personal background. I want to pivot a bit about you, and obviously with you're an entrepreneur yourself. You talked about earlier how the CEO needs to speak with clarity and communicate, but also the employee or anyone needs to have clarity on what they actually want to do with their lives and their career. And so I'm curious how you came to do what you do, how you decided to start your own company, and what that journey was like for you.
So I'll be brief on this. I actually had my own public relations firm a number of years ago, in the mid 1990s. Had about a dozen employees. Um, I think we had real clarity about what we wanted to be in the marketplace, and I think because of that, we became a place that people wanted to work in our market. Um, and But it was funny because at the time, I think some people can feel liberated by owning their own business. I felt shackled by it. I felt like my name's on the door. I have to live in the city for the rest of my life. I've got, you know what I mean? These are the things that are running through your head, right? I mean, which by the way is a perfectly great place and all that. So but you start feeling that your possibilities become limited as opposed to expanded. Um, so I actually ended up selling that company. Worked for a company where we kind of folded in the subsidiary into a larger entity, and I ran it inside that company and enjoyed that for a number of years, and then continued on kind of with my career. Um, when I left Vistage after writing the first book, it became evident to me how much I loved this work and how much I wanted to do it not as a representative of a particular organization, as much as I certainly think Vistage is terrific at what they do, but I really wanted to be an advocate for it in a way that would not only maybe benefit Vistage, the third party, but benefit YPO and EO and REF and Rex Roundtables and Virginia Council of CEOs and all of these folks that are out there doing this great work. so that I could shine a light on the category. And so I don't have employees right now, but what I have done is I created a certification program where I have people who are basically certified facilitators for. So if you live, it doesn't matter if you live in China, if you live in Canada, if you live in the United States, or in New Zealand, for example, we have we've got someone who could bring that to you. And what's interesting about this, kind of also speaking to your question, is when I ran the facilitation program very early on, or going into it, people are looking at all this material and saying to themselves, I'm never going to be able to deliver this like you would. You've created this stuff. It's a part of like who you are and part of all of that. And I remember looking at them and just saying, I don't want you to deliver it like I would. I want you to deliver it in a way I never could. And what I meant by that was we have people who are a part of our who are our certified facilitators. One of them is a U.S. Navy captain. There's another one that has more international business experience than I will ever get in 3 lifetimes. There's another woman who speaks several languages and lives in the parts of the world that just opens up incredible possibilities for us. But I said, take this content, connect it with your stories, your experience, and own it as part of who you are, and be able to talk about it again in a way that I never could. And I said, that's what's going to bring this content to life. And I think as people have embraced that, it's become very powerful in terms of what they do and what we can learn from one another, about it. So it's really exciting. And, we had a big year in 2023, 2024. I think we're going to take it to a whole different level. We've got launching a new website in January. And because what this can mean, especially at this time, for groups and teams around the world, I think is incalculable. And I want to make sure that we have as many people out there who can extend the reach of this work into as many companies as we can. And so that's why I'm excited about it. That's kind of finding my passion, even at my age, and thinking like I've never enjoyed what I do more in my life than I do right now.
No, I'm sure that's a great feeling to have found that. I think that leads into my next question and into other people that want to be entrepreneurs. Is that the key? Is it finding work that you're passionate about, or can you just pick anything to be successful? I think you talked about how you're running the PR firm. I mean, maybe you didn't have that feeling then and you have it now. So is it important to pick the right thing and know that you like it, or can you just grind it out in any venture as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think you have to be passionate about it. A lesson I got on that early on was, being in the, PR brand kind of business, right? When I had clients that I really loved their business, how much more inspired I was to think about all the possibilities and all the things they could do. If they were in a business that really was less interesting to me, it's very difficult to put that kind of energy against it. And, in fairness to that client, doesn't mean they don't have a great business. It doesn't actually resonate or connect with me in a way that I think they're going to get my best. They're going to get someone else who really is into that business and cares about really what they do and who they serve. That is going to be a much better fit, for them. So I think in terms of what we do, it can't just be about, well, I'm into this and because it's just going to make money. I kind of do believe in Jim Collins when he created his hedgehog concept, right? What am I passionate about? What can I be the best in the world at? And what drives my economic engine? And what is that? What does that look like? And I think that is a really powerful combination for any entrepreneur when you start reflecting on what do I truly love? What's my differentiator? What are the things? What can I bring to the table that makes this different? And because of that, and I know I can deliver on that in a way that's kind of what I'm best in the world at. And then also, are people willing to pay for it? And who is that? And what does that look like? And I think once you can kind of figure that out for yourself as an entrepreneur, I think it's powerful way to get rolling. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the passion allows you to keep going when you're not potentially seeing the results that you want
No doubt.
initially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to close us out here, maybe the final question, as you look back on your journey, your career, your entrepreneurial journey, any advice you'd give 22-year-old Leo, or anything you would change about the path you've taken in your life, in your career, and your building businesses?
Well, I wouldn't change anything. And the reason I only say that is because I always kind of feel as if I were to change anything in my past, it would take me off the trajectory of where I am right now. So I wouldn't mess with that ever. So nothing
Mm-hmm.
changes. My advice to my 22-year-old self, though, or I think about it, even the fact that I was in my early 30s when I ran my own company, is joining a peer advisory group. And I mean that sincerely.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most people who are part of groups today, who join them later in life, 40s, 50s, even 60s, will the first words out of their mouth typically is, "I wish I had done this sooner," because they recognize the power and value of it, and not feeling you're going to be alone in doing this, and be able to really, um, I think, leverage the wisdom of other people, and by the same token, being able to make a difference and contribute to other people's businesses as well. I would 100% think about what peer advisory group is right for me. And you may join one for a while and then you join another one, or some people are a member of a couple of them, depending on what they're looking for from the particular group. But I think it's life changing.
Yeah, a really good point. I think a great way to end too. And so I will give you the floor. I'm sure you can help people with that through Peer, right? So where can people find out more about you and what you're doing, and how they can establish or join a peer advisor group?
So, in the very near term, you can go to leobottary.com, leobottary.com, which in a matter of just a few weeks, though, is going to serve largely as an archive site for the new peer site, which will be available at peernovation.biz shortly after the first of the year. And I think that site, again, creates a greater level of clarity. And also, we brought new content to the table as well that stands on the shoulders of the many of the models we talked about, and takes to a whole other level, particularly for companies today. So yeah. So P.biz is where it's going to be at. And of course, I'd really encourage people to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Connect or follow, or however you want to do that. And that's the way people can kind of find out about each other and what each other does. And there's a lot of really great people and a lot of great activities going on out there in this world. And I continue to discover them all the time. And yeah, so they can do that. And I would really appreciate it. And hey, I'm just wishing everybody a really good holidays, a great 2024, and be a good year next year.
All right. Leo, thanks so much. Yeah, your LinkedIn, your website, the new website will all be linked in the description. So again, I appreciate you taking the time. I found a lot of value from this. I'm sure members of my audience will as well. And I wish you continued success in the future.
Thanks, Connor.